Prynhawn da i chi gyd, a diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am ymuno gyda ni ar gyfer ein webinar heddi i baratoi i ddarparu'r cymhwyster sylfaen gan edrych yn benodol ar systemau ac offer electrodechnegol. Rydym i gyd yn gweithio o adre, felly ymddeiriadau ymlaen llaw am unrhyw sŵn yn y cefndir ac unrhyw oedi yn y sleidiau. Good afternoon to you all, and thank you very much for joining us for a webinar on how to prepare to deliver the foundation qualification, looking specifically at electrotechnical systems and equipment. As we are all working from home, I apologise in advance for any background noise and any delay in the slides. Byddwch yn derbyn e-bost cyn diwedd y webinar gyda linc i'n harolwg. Byddem yn ddiolchgar iawn petai chi'n cymeryd yr amser i lenwi hwn. Mae eich adborth yn werthfawr iawn i ni. You will receive an email before the session ends with a link to a survey. We would be very grateful if you could take the time to fill in the survey, as your feedback is very valuable to us. Dyma beth fyddwn ni'n trafod prynhawn yma. This is what we will be discussing this afternoon. Byddwn nhw'n edrych ar gynnwys y gymhwyster sylfaen. Byddwn yn anadrodd ac ailedrych ar rhywfaint o gynnwys a trafodwyd yn ein gweminarau sylfaen yr wythnos diwethaf. Byddwn yn edrych ar strwythur unedau ac amlinelliad o'r asesiadau. Byddwn yn edrych ar yr adnoddau a fydd ar gael i chi, yna ymlaen i'r camau nesaf ac i gael cyfle i chi ofyn unrhyw gwestiynau i ni. Teipiwch unrhyw gwestiynau sydd gennych trwy gydol y webinar hon yn y tab cwestiynau ar ochr dde eich sgrin. Gobeithio fydd gennym amser ar ddiwedd y cyflwyniad i ateb cymaint o gwestiynau ag y gallwn. Mae'r sesiwn wedi'i gynllunio am awr a hanner. Bydd y cyflwyniad yn cymeryd tua 40-50 munud a ddylai adael digon o amser ar gyfer cwestiynau. This is what we'll be discussing this afternoon. We will be covering the foundation qualification content. This will help recap and revisit some content covered in last week's foundation webinars. We will look at the structure of units and an outline of the assessment. We will have a look at resources that will be available for you. Then on to the next steps, and to close, an opportunity for you to ask us any questions. Please type in any questions that you have throughout this webinar in the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen. We will hopefully have time at the end of the presentation to answer as many questions as we can. The session is planned for an hour and a half, and the presentation will take around 40-50 minutes, which should leave plenty of time for your questions. Dyma i chi eich cyflwynwyr heddi. Here are your presenters today. Mae David Pye gyda ni, sef Cynghorydd Technegol Gwasanaethau Adeiladu City & Guilds. David Pye, who is the Lead Technical Advisor for Building Services at City & Guilds. Mae Salim Bisram gyda ni, sef Reolwr Diwydiant ar gyfer Gwasanaethau Adeiladu. Salim Bisram, who is our Industry Manager for Building Services at City & Guilds. A fi, sef Angharad Lloyd Bainen, a fi yw'ch eich Reolwr Busnes ar gyfer Cymru i City & Guilds, and myself, Angharad Lloyd Bainen, who's the Business Development Manager for Wales at City & Guilds. Nawr, fe gewn Paul sydyn i wybod am eich dealltwriaeth chi am y cwestiynau yma gan edrych ar y systemau ac offer electrodechnegol yn benodol. Now we will have a quick poll for us to know your understanding of these new qualifications, looking specifically at the electrotechnical systems and equipment. Felly, sut byddwch yn disgrifio eich dealltwriaeth chi o'r cymhwyster sylfaen gan feddwl am systemau ac offer electrodechnegol? Rhwch eich rhif fyna a 5 yn meddwl y rhif ucha. Therefore, how would you rate your understanding of the foundation qualification, thinking specifically about the electrotechnical systems and equipment, with 5 being your highest answer? Rwy'n i chydig eiliadau i chi gael cyfle i ateb. We'll give you a few seconds to answer.
Seems to have everyone's answered now, I think. Just give it a couple of seconds for any final responses.
Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi. Ffigur yna'n ddiddorol iawn, felly gobeithio erbyn diwedd y webinar hon bydd fwy o ddealltwriaeth gyda chi. Thank you very much for putting in your results. Very interesting to see, and hopefully by the end of this webinar you'll have greater understanding. Hoffwn nawr eich trosglwyddo i Salim Bisram a fydd yn eich tywysg trwy'r sleidiau nesaf gyda chi. I would now like to pass you over to Salim Bisram, who will now take you through the next slide. Diolch.
Thank you, Angharad, and welcome. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you once again, Angharad, for those lovely introductions. So we're now going to be looking at the sector review, and the idea is to get some context and put some context around the reason why we are actually here today. And I'm sure a lot of the delegates on this webinar today and over the recent webinars that we've been hosting will still be wondering why the transformation. To put some context for this change and the reasons why is to really look at the most recent sector review, and this has come through Qualification Wales around the Building the Futures sector review of qualifications and the qualification systems in construction and the built environment, which was published in 2018. The review included many discussions with various stakeholders, including a number of employers. In brief, the outcome was as follows: to meet the skills needs of Wales, reducing the number of qualifications out there that are already in the marketplace, and providing clear progression routes portably within Wales and beyond. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at a little bit more about the stakeholder engagement and the importance it plays within the sector review as well as going forward. So here we have provided a brief overview of the stakeholders that have helped develop and shape the content we have developed. Employers, including micro businesses, medium and large contractors, current PR actioneers across the sector, produced by your peers with experience of delivering and developing qualifications and resources that are required. Next slide, please. So this slide actually focuses on the actual foundation qualification. The foundation qualification that we're going to cover is the entry point for learners who wish to start their journey towards occupational competence in a construction or building services engineering trade. This diagram shows the various learner journeys through the new suite of qualifications and how the foundation is the starting point. Learner A starts as a full-time learner on the foundation qualification, and then after the first year secures employment and starts their apprenticeship level 3 qualification. Learner B here, we can see that they commence as a full-time learner on the foundation, and due to not being able to secure employment, return to continue a second year full-time progression qualification. Learner C has been successful in gaining employment as an apprentice and will therefore work towards their core qualification, which is the mandatory foundation units plus one trade unit, and then continue their education as an apprentice. At this point, I'm now going to hand back over to David to take you through some slides.
Thank you very much, Salim and Angharad, and welcome everyone. I hope you're all very safe and well. So, the first document to draw your attention to is a qualification handbook. It's always a starting point when considering the content, the depth of understanding, and the unit structure. The handbook is available from the Skills for Wales website, and the link is on this slide. The next document we will consider during this presentation is the assessment pack. This is broken down into sections, section 2 for the learner and sections 3, 4 and 5 for the assessor. When you look at the handbook, you will see the 6 core units assessed via an on-screen exam and a range of trade-specific units to achieve the foundation in construction and building services level 2. Although a level 2 qualification, this is seen as the entry point for most learners, and it is a broad offer that leads on to the trade-specific progression qualification. As shown on the previous slide, the total GLH is 540. It's worth pointing out again that the total qualification time, so including some self-study, reflection time, some formative assessments, etc., comes to 600 hours or 60 credits. So here we can see all the core units. So just take a moment to familiarise yourselves with this slide, the core unit titles, and so on. We have selected for this webinar the electrical unit, as you can see at the bottom of this slide. You'll be familiar with much of the content in the 6 core units, as we've previously delivered units in current and previous BSc and electrical qualifications covering health and safety, environmental impacts such as wastage of materials, introduction to other trades, working with others, emerging technologies. So I wouldn't expect staff to require much upskilling to be aware of the new unit structure and content. However, to support this, we will have a new foundation textbook, but more on this a little bit later. To meet the rules of combination and the 540 GLH, learners and centres will need to select a second trade specific unit. In your planning, this will require some consideration with your timetabling and preparing for the assessment. So it's just a moment really to reflect on the unit structure we've looked at in the last couple of slides, how you plan to deliver that, when you have your meetings, when you got your in-house training days, when you meet with staff and management, how are you best going to timetable for these new qualifications? How will you consider delivering them? Just have a think about some of those things. That might reflect and give you some ideas of questions that you'll ask at the end. It may form some questions in your own mind. Just have a reflection, a consideration of it. You can start typing out your questions now. We will come to them at the end of the webinar. We should have plenty of time. But as you have them, you can type them out as we're working through. Okay, so now let's have a little look at the unit structure. There can be a temptation to look at assessments and work backwards to delivery. But if we consider the handbook and the details in the units, we will get a full outlook and a full picture of the content to be delivered. The learning outcome is the overview. The criteria starts to detail what outcome is expected for successful assessment, and the range indicates the breadth of knowledge and skills to be covered. All elements of the range must be covered in delivery. On the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you can see where all these documents can be found on the Skills for Wales website. So we've just put that there so you can become familiar with how that looks. When you go onto the Skills for Wales website, you scroll down and click Documents. This is how you'll see all of these documents that we're referring to in this webinar. This is a unit we are considering today, Virtual Systems and Equipment. The top of the page will show the title, the level, and the GLH, which is 140. It then goes on to describe an overview of the unit, and it's worth reminding us all at this time that the trade-specific units are allocated 140 GLH. So the two trade units will make just over half of the full qualification. So following on, we can see the learning outcome, discussed on an earlier slide. So no underlying principles of electrotechnical work. If we look at criteria 1.1, we can see the main roles and tasks in electrotechnical work. We could then ask, well, what does this cover? This is where we consider the range. So in this case, domestic, commercial, and industrial. Then we can ask, well, what depth? Well, the depth is in the lower box. It describes further the expected outcomes. If we have a look at 1.2, that might give us a better idea. So 1.2, the main electrical principles of a circuit, and there is the full range that will be delivered, the supply source, the current flow, overcurrent protection, and so on. But if you need to dig a little deeper to have a better understanding of what you will teach for that and what you will cover, you scroll lower down into the delivery outcomes, depth of content, which starts talking in a bit more depth. They will know the electrical circuit's function by virtue of the flow of the negatively charged electrons and so on. So that's the best way to use this document and to understand this content before we have a look at the assessments. So to help reinforce the message from the previous slide and to show you how BSc is considered in the core units, we'll take a quick look at Unit 102 and outcomes 1.1 and 1.2. You can see the same layout and structure with plenty of information to guide the depth of delivery. Considering the main activities of trades, as in these outcomes, it will link the learner project that they work on, and it forms part of the planning task. So hopefully you start to see how the core units and the project and the specific trade units start to link together. So let's take a closer look at assessment. The foundation qualification is assessed using 3 assessment methods. First of all, the on-screen assessment, which is externally set and externally marked, with an overall weighting of 20%. Then the practical project, covering trade areas, externally set and internally marked, with a weighting of 60%. The guided discussion is externally set and internally marked and has a weighting of 20%. As many learners prefer hands-on experience, this weighting of assessments will identify and reward the demonstrated skills within the practical project. So moving on, the on-screen assessment covering the core units is 70 minutes long, contains 45 questions. This is completed prior to the practical and the guided discussion. The practical project, made up of 3 tasks that require the learner to plan, do, and evaluate. This is taken before the guided discussion. The guided discussion contains 3 parts, including the learner's reflection. This method of assessment is externally set, internally marked, and externally verified. The guided discussion can only take place once the learner has completed the practical project. A quick note at the bottom about health and safety assessment. If a learner wishes to gain the CSCS trainee card or similar, they can go on to take a health and safety assessment using the learning that they've completed as part of this foundation course, but that sits outside of this qualification. So it's not actually part of the qualification. So here we can see some examples of the questions from the on-screen test. Some are straight multiple choice, some are drag and drop, and others are pictures asking a learner to identify. This will be similar to what we do currently on many assessments, with possibly the addition of a variety of question types. This assessment is available as a sample on the Skills for Wales website, so please have a look at that if you haven't done so already. So the practical project, this will be a new approach to assessment, but uses many similar approaches we've used in previous assessments, particularly when we consider design type assessments and practicals with supporting evidence. So whilst it may be a new title and appear like a new approach, it should be very familiar to many tutors and assessors. The first section is the planning, which is made up of 5 tasks. These are the same tasks regardless of the trade area. The approach will be the same, but the content would differ depending on the trades selected. The time allocated to planning is 15 hours, and time gained cannot be used for other parts of the assessment. The second section is the actual practical, and the time allocated is 20 hours for each trade. Learners will use their own materials list, own method statements, etc. that they created in their planning, so links directly to their practical. The review section has 5 hours allocated. They will then, part of this review, link their own planning to their own projects to bring it all together. Also, the learner will reflect on how their planning linked to that practical and how they met their objectives as part of their general performance. So just as an overview as the purpose and how it brings everything together. So here we can see a sample assessment, which is 3 new circuits, including a one-way lighting circuit. No doubt you're familiar with this type of assessment. The circuits will bring together different skills from across the unit content and tie in with the previous planning activities the learners will have already completed. To accompany the circuit diagrams, there's also a specification of electrical materials and the expectations on where to measure from and the types of supplies and so on. These sample assessments, again, are available on the Skills for Wales website, so please take a closer look if you haven't done so already. But hopefully just looking at that screen and looking at the diagrams, it will hopefully reassure you that it's very familiar in terms of types of assessments. On the next slide, here we can see the materials list. There will be an overview materials list for the centres to help you plan and prepare, but this list isn't to be shared with the learners, as they will make their own as part of their planning activity. The right-hand side of the slide shows a marking grid. The grid helps us to grade the learner as we use the tolerances as part of applying marks, such as within 2 millimeters for 3 marks. This is an approach used in some previous qualifications, such as the 7202. So again, it should be familiar to assessors, but if not, it's a fairly straightforward method and is similar to the approach used in the Skills for Wales competitions. The guided discussion will explore the learner knowledge of the wider construction sector, including one of their chosen trade areas. And as I previously said, it will look to link the planning to the practical. And as part of that, the learner will be reviewing their own performance and their own planning. So here's an overview of the assessments for the foundation qualification, but let's focus on the summary. Learners will receive a provisional grade for the practical project and guided discussion, and we aim to have that completed within 1 week. It will undergo internal and external quality assurance, and the final grading will be issued by City and Guilds. It's worth noting that the slight change in procedure to current qualifications, this is to enable us to quality assure and to calculate the grading based on results across all 3 assessments. So we have to incorporate the on-screen assessment results in the overall grading. If a learner fails to successfully achieve a pass grade in any of the assessments, then they are permitted to resubmit. Okay, just a few more slides from me before I pass you back over to my colleague, Salim. I'm sure if you've been on previous webinars, you may have seen these, but we'll quickly go through some of the support that is still available. We have a prospectus document available on the Skills for Wales website to help centres with the promotional literature. We also have an overview resources document to provide centres with assistance for their initial planning. So again, I would recommend if you're having internal meetings or CPD days, these documents are very helpful and useful in helping you build your own promotional literature and to help share with staff so you have an idea of an overview of the qualifications. Of course, for deeper content, you will need to access the handbook, but it's a great starting point to become familiar with the new qualifications. To assist in planning, we have an adaptable delivery planner. Many of you will have seen this in our initial foundation webinars. It's an editable document to support planning and delivery of the qualification. To support your CPD, we will be releasing a quarterly newsletter with links to various opportunities to engage with learning experiences. These may be links to dedicated videos or new manufacturers' news and updates and so on. We have a completely new suite of tutor resources, as you can see coming up on this slide. These have been offered for review and include typical support materials such as presentations, handouts, question papers. It's worth noting if anyone is interested in working with us as a reviewer, you can send in an expression of interest to the Skills for Wales email address, or equally you could send it in directly to me, david.pye@cityandguilds.com, an expression of interest with a CV, and we can share that with our Smart Screen teams as a consultant to review. Alternatively, if you're just interested in having an early look at some of the material, and if you could just share some thoughts with us, we're happy to do that as well if you can get in contact. We're also creating a resource section on the Skills for Wales website to collate learning resources from third parties, such as providers and centres. We'll also link to relevant courses from the trade and industry bodies such as CITB, the CIPHE, and so on. We did mention earlier when we're looking at the unit structure, and I said I'd mention later around the new foundation textbook from Hodder. So this is a dedicated foundation book created to support the delivery and learning. There's a sample chapter which can be accessed through the link on this slide. Some of the extra key points which are available in the textbook are the knowledge test preparation for assessment. So a really useful hints and tips sections within this textbook to support delivery, possibly your own CPD and understanding, and also support the learners in their learning. In addition, Hodder are creating free mapping documents into their current electoral textbooks. so they can be used with the new suite of qualifications. Okay, thank you very much. I'll now like to hand you back over to my colleague Salim Bisram, who'll take you through the final few slides.
Cheers, David. I can imagine there must be a lot of content that and information that delegates will have, been taken through just now. And obviously, just to remind everyone on today's webinar to put your questions through. Obviously, you've got myself, David, and Angharad who can answer those questions as best we can. And obviously, we do have a Q&A towards the end of these slides. But any questions you do have, please feel free to put those into the Q&A panel. So the next couple of slides is around the transition arrangements. But before I commence, I just want to take this opportunity to remind people, although you are aware that Qualification Wales wrote to all colleges before the end of December, outlining the transition arrangements that would be implemented commencing September 2021. Qualification Wales during January hosted 2 webinars to go through the transition arrangements. The recording of these webinars are available on Qualification Wales website. Due to the current pandemic, further discussions are also taking place between Qualification Wales and colleges to discuss the transition arrangements further, and we may see additional alternatives. So just basically, we'll pass on any information as and when we get it. Here you can see we have highlighted 3 examples as it is at this moment in time. The first example is a learner who is currently working towards a broad level 1 qualification 6219 construction skills and continues as a full-time learner would move onto the foundation qualification. The second example is a learner who has covered a trade-specific level 1 qualification and again continues as a full-time learner would be expected to continue either the foundation level 2 or the progression level 2 qualification. Example 3, a learner completes their trade-specific level 1 qualification and starts an apprenticeship would commence on their level 3 qualification. There is, as we speak, discussions taking place between colleges and Qualification Wales regarding additional transition requirements. It is, however, expected at this moment in time that any new entrants commencing within this sector in September 2021 will be registered onto the new suite of qualifications. David, next slide, please. So just on timelines, so just moving towards 2021, we have set timelines and I would like to go through a number of these key milestones. Unfortunately, due to the virus, we are having to continue with webinars, and the progression and apprenticeship webinars will commence April through to May, following the same pattern as we have for the foundation. By the end of this week, the window will be live for centre approvals for the foundation qualification. Progression and apprenticeship, the window will open from May to June. We will then be providing opportunities by running teaching, learning and assessment webinars during May through to June, ready for first teaching in September 2021. There are other dates I haven't gone through as yet, but we are here to provide you with the confidence of where we are at this moment in time. Fingers crossed, we're planning to commence face-to-face meetings in September, our go live face-to-face meeting. So basically, again, as this is a bit of a moving piece of work, as soon as we know more information in time around when we're able to conduct those face-to-face meetings, we'll let you know. And I'm just going to pass you back over to David.
Thank you very much, Salim. What we'll do now is we'll move into the questions. So I can see that many questions have been typed in. So I'll just pause just for a few moments while I load those up on my screen, and I'll try and read them and then respond to them. So please just bear with me a moment. Okay, so I think the first one's probably looking for clarity as to the structure. So it's saying an apprentice starting at year 1 would complete all the units in the foundation level 2, apart from the one extra trade specific unit. So if I break that sort of query down, first of all, that's correct. Apprentices will do a version of the foundation. It will be called the core, and it will be the core 6 units, but only one trade specific unit, and it's the one relating to their apprenticeship. So that's correct. Also all the units in the progression award level 2, and finally all the units in the last 2 years of the level 3 apprentice. They won't specifically, as I understand it, do necessarily the units in the progression. They'll just go on to the apprenticeship then. So that they'll achieve everything through the apprenticeship side. They won't sort of break it down to do part of the foundation, part of the progression, and the rest in the apprenticeship. It'll just be the core units in the foundation, which will be called, and they'll get a separate certificate called the core, and then they'll complete the apprenticeship. Secondly, what would the full-time learner do after completing the progression at level 2 if you're unsuccessful in achieving an apprenticeship but keen to continue? Well, with the new structure, if this new structure remains as it is, and that's what we're all working towards, you're right. We've got we've just got the how can I describe this? The foundation, the progression, and the apprenticeship. That's the easiest way to describe it, I guess. So people will complete the foundation. They will move on to the progression qualification, and then hopefully they will get employment to move into the apprenticeship. There's no current in this current structure. There is no level 3 full-time qualification. So let's mark that off. Okay, a few comments about the foundation qualifications and the documentation. Yeah, they're all available. They've been launched and available, and talk about the material for the progression and apprenticeship. Well, the apprenticeship and the progression in building services are being developed by our colleagues at EL, so they're taking lead. So as part of the collaboration, we're working together on many of the parts of this development, but we're taking the lead on the foundation and the construction progression and apprenticeship, where EL are taking the lead on the building services progression and apprenticeship. So yeah, there's further webinars coming on board for those. We should there are some dates I think penciled in for those. We'll have to check the Skills for Wales website to see if the actual dates have been confirmed, and that's probably the time to start asking further questions about the around the apprenticeship and the progression. So we can try and answer some of those questions today if we can. We are more than happy to do so, but development of those is still ongoing, so there's still some development work going on with those, so we'll have to remain and wait and see if in case we can't answer all your questions around that, because a couple of reasons: we're not leading on it, and some of it may still be in development. So sorry, there are a lot of questions. I'm trying to sort of merge some of them so I don't duplicate sort of answers.
Sorry, David, you're going to be solo because I can't actually see the questions because I'm set up as a panelist and not an organizer. So unfortunately,
Right.
I can't help you out here, old friend.
That's fine. Don't worry. That's fine.
I didn't
might
want
be
you to
able
think
do
that you're doing this all alone. I am here, but unfortunately, I can't see the questions.
there you go. I've made you an organizer, so you may be able to see them, but that's fine. I can work through. So
I
which
can see them now.
Okay. So which AO is responsible for awarding progression and MBQ qualifications? If not skills, will the centres have two different EQAs? There will be an EQA for those qualifications at progression and apprenticeship. And yes, it will have a foundation EQA. And what we're looking at the moment is that there'll be an EQA for building services and there'll be an EQA for construction with the foundation. So there'll be, what we're looking towards is if we have an EQA with relevant skill base to be able to look after building services foundation qualifications. So you're not having 3 EQAs as it were, you'd only have 2, one for the foundation. If you were sharing the pathway with plumbing, some have expressed an interest in other pathways for the second trade area, but many are saying plumbing. So it might work out a little bit better if you did do plumbing, if you're thinking along the lines of the EQA.
And David, I don't know if you've answered that question around will these qualifications be put back a year due to the pandemic we find ourselves in? I mean, really, I kind of mentioned that in my slide around next steps. I mean, basically, the plan is, they are still going to be continuing as of today in September 2021. But as you know, things are moving quite rapidly. We are in dialogue with Qualification Wales, and as soon as we hear any new information around potentially this being put back a year or the likelihood, the timetable continuing in September 2021, we will obviously we'll let you know as soon as we can.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. A question about the sample paper and not having any electrical questions or any specific electrical questions in. And I'm wondering if that's a sample, therefore, when the new one comes out, or the live one, will it be more related to electrical? It's very much core units for that purpose. It's to give a broad spectrum of skills across the construction industry to all learners. So what you will see is that will be the same assessment for all learners, regardless of the trade area they work towards. So learners now entering at foundation will be covering a broader background. And when I looked at those questions, I did find some quite familiar, not being electrical specific, but some questions were quite familiar with the type of topics that we've delivered in the past in BSc qualifications and electrical, such as working with other trades, health and safety, because it is that general overview, that's how it's created. The knowledge for electrical will be assessed through the project. Now you have the planning, you have the practical, which is a doing, obviously, and then you have the reflection piece and the guided discussion. There'll be elements of knowledge being drawn out of that practical project. So the knowledge for electrical will still be assessed, but through that project. The general construction, the broad overview, will be assessed through the on-screen exam. So regarding the practical project, the planning and review sections need to be completed in the classroom. Who will be responsible for delivering the teaching and assessment of these? The lecturers or the workshop supervisors. So regarding the practical project, the planning and review sections need to be completed in the classroom for delivering the teaching and assessment of these. Well, I suppose that's for your own centres to figure out the contents there, the type of assessments there, who is best suited in your centres to deliver and assess on those elements. Different centres have slightly different roles. They'll have tutors or programme managers or workshop technicians or just practical tutors. So it's difficult for us to say exactly. It will come down to your own centres and how you divide that work up and who's most suitable for those roles. So that's how I'd probably answer that. Can I ask if current full-time students wanted to progress with the current tech cert, such as 3365, am I right to say that if we were a college registered by the end of May 21, then we can continue to deliver these quals with funding continuing in place? Does this go for apprentices too? Well, if you refer to the slide that Celine went through on the transition, that is what's being looked at the moment for people in the system. What qualifications will be funded ongoing? So I can confidently say that 2365 as a qualification is available next year. But the question is it funded in Wales for next year? So the qualification definitely available. Is it funded? That is being looked at as part of the transition at the moment. If you're asking if you can register them during this year and they'll be funded next year, they'll only be funded next year if Qualification Wales fund them for next year. I suspect if it's the same way as when I worked in a college, the funding is done during an academic year. So if you had funding for learners and you registered 13 September, or you registered 28 in September and 2 in January, it's still in that academic year where the funds would come in. If you register them in this academic year, it's funds for this academic year, not for next academic year, if that makes sense. But I think if you're looking at progression, pay attention to that transition slide and let's wait for the confirmation on what will be funded in terms of transition. So I think it's in principle, it's fully understood why you'd be asking that question for current learners. As regards new entrants, certainly up until a few weeks ago, we were considered that it would be all the new suite of qualifications, and that is the offer for all new entrants. But again, I believe there's discussions taking place with leads at centres and Qualification Wales looking at the current pandemic and any impact of that. So I believe there'll be further updates in February. So let's keep an eye on that really.
Yeah, and just to add to that, obviously, as you know, I think the question alluded to at the end of May, which is currently when those qualifications drop off for funding in Wales, and obviously a decision will be made around February. And then obviously if the decision is to utilize the existing qualifications that people are actually using, then those will be extended pretty soon then as well.
Will there be a limit on research for assessments? There's no limit. I think what would probably happen is, if you think of the project, there's quite a few elements to that. So if a learner's unsuccessful with that and you carry out some further learning for that learner, then there's going to be a time impact for the centre and the provider, particularly with a number of learners. So I'd be, although there's no limit, I think naturally during the academic year, if learners were failing by some distance and on multiple areas, it would be difficult for them to achieve within a standard time period. But if they're just unsuccessful in some certain parts, then I'm sure with some relearning they can be successful. But there's no dedicated limit. So a question about what about the learners who have not found an apprenticeship but have completed their tech certs? Well, at this moment in time, with the current structure, they'll have the foundation qualification, then the progression qualification, then they'll need to work towards an apprenticeship. So the new structure, that is how it's put together. They'll need to work towards an apprenticeship. Okay, there's one that says read out the questions. Is that for me to read out the questions when they come up?
Maybe that might be me.
Oh no, we can. That's fine. We can make sure we do that now. How is on-site assessment for apprentices going to be achieved? Well, that's being looked at the moment as part of the apprenticeship. So I know there are Kevin Sparrow at EL has been sharing some information with the Welsh Electrical Forum. So if you're not involved with that, drop us a line and I'll try and put you in touch with that group, and we can keep you up to date with that. But that's part of the apprenticeship, and in future webinars we'll no doubt be able to pick those up. Will the 6219 continue to be used as a level qualification for progression into a foundation at level 2? Also, will the 720201 still be available? 6219 definitely available, yes, as a pre-foundation. And the 7202 we are looking at and working with Qualification Wales at the moment for a non-trade specific version of that. So we will have hopefully news on that, more specific news soon in the coming months, but we are definitely looking at offering a 7202 multi-trade, so it will cover plumbing and electrical. It can't be trade specific. So I think we've answered all the questions so far. Let's have a look at the time. Okay, we've got plenty of time left. The other webinars we've run have ended early because we've got through the presentation and the questions early, but we wanted to leave plenty of time to make sure that you all had an opportunity to ask those questions. So please, if you think of any others, give me, just type it in, or if there's questions we haven't answered correctly or you're looking for further clarification, please again type those in and we'll try and answer those. Just while people are thinking of any further questions, also if you've got any feedback on the presentation, on the qualifications, or just sharing thoughts, it doesn't have to be a question as such. You may have some thoughts about the future, thoughts and feedback about these qualifications, please type those thoughts in. We will be doing a survey. I think Anne had mentioned earlier, we will be sharing a survey after this webinar. Really appreciate if you can use that survey to share your thoughts. We can improve these sessions. Hopefully when we're back face to face, we can get out and see you. We do plan to do a deeper dive. So what we're aiming to do with the webinars is slowly build up your knowledge and understanding rather than take everything to you at once. It'd be a little bit overwhelming, and hopefully you've been part of the journey as we do the development as well. So hopefully this has brought you up to date a little bit more with the electrical side and with the foundation overall. And you can, after today, after we've answered some further questions that are coming through, hopefully you can take that information away, you can reflect, have a look more at some of the details and some of the content. And then when we do our next range of webinars, or hopefully face-to-face, we'll do a deeper dive into the assessments themselves and filling in the forms and the approaches. So if there's anything specific in future you're looking for, please let us know. We're looking to put on some dedicated sessions for parts of the project, so helping you plan, do the planning part, helping you do the practical part, and then good practice guides on the guided discussion. So there's some of our thoughts currently. Please let us know if that works for you. Considering there's currently nothing for full-time learners to do with regards to level 3 routes in the electrical, will BTEC electrical units be allowed to be RPL into this new level 3 route if funding is available to do the BTEC? A few things to consider there. BTECs are generally professional and technical qualifications, so not really the level 3 electrical content that we would deliver as part of a vocational course as such, because they're a slightly different purpose, slightly different audience. More so people progressing into H&Cs and foundation degrees and similar to do the clerk of works, the professional management type roles and estimator roles. So how much of that content would be eligible for RPL? It would have to be the same content to be considered. Without looking at it, I wouldn't know that answer. But from knowing the purpose of those qualifications, I doubt there'd be much that could be pulled across. but it'd be an activity, I suspect, for EL as they're developing the content for the level 3 apprenticeship. So they may know more in time, but I wouldn't like to build people's hopes up and assume that's just a progression into apprenticeship similar to what you have at the moment. I would doubt that would be the case. Is there a specific date for this in the online assessment, or is it similar to the Evolve exams we currently use? So at the moment, it's on demand. So it'll be when the learners are available and ready to sit that exam. It's an on-demand exam. Is there a date for the release of the Hodder book? I'd have to check with Hodder. We spoke to them just last week, actually, and they said it's pretty much good to go. So I believe it's almost ready. But we might have to take that back to Hodder to ask, do they have a specific date for that launch? I don't know if you remember them mentioning the date at all, Salim, other than it's almost ready.
That's correct. It's not far away, to be honest. I think we mentioned that we do have some sample materials on that Hodder book already, which are available for people to view. But I can certainly take that back as an action and speak to our publishing department and our digital team to see where we are with that, and then potentially we can go back with a date to all the attendees.
Thanks, Liam. Thank you. So if there's any other questions that have come up that I've not answered correctly or in detail, or maybe I missed the point or misunderstood your question, or if there's, as I say, if there's any just thoughts and feedback, really, please feel free just to put down your thoughts or any questions. We don't have to take the full hour and a half if it naturally comes to an end. I mean, we're almost at 4 o'clock now. So what we'll do, we'll leave it a few more minutes to see if any other questions come in. We'll then probably take just a final couple of slides just to update you on around the feedback that we'll be looking for as part of a survey. But we'll stay on as long as we need to. I hope you found it helpful and useful. It's the aim to, as I said earlier, just to try and bring you along and continually update you. To clarify, the foundation, there is only one online exam covering all the units, hence the exam will be end loaded. Yes, the exam will be on the core units. So there's one exam for all the core units. So yes, it will be naturally happening at the latter end of the academic course, yes. So what I think I'll do now, I think we'll take the final couple of slides, and then what I'll do is I'll come back to the questions and I'll see if any other questions have come in whilst I've done the last couple of slides, and if not, we can always close early if needed. So as mentioned earlier, your feedback is important to us, and it can really help make sure we're communicating in the right way and informs us of how to make your improvements to the information we provide. So, you know, I know webinars aren't always perfect. I think they're good in the current climate, and they're good at getting some information across. They're not always able to give you the handouts quite the same as when you're face to face. But working in the pandemic, hopefully it's a way of us keeping you all up to date as best that we can. But yeah, but when you get a chance for that feedback, really appreciate if you can do that. It should come through as an email, and it tends to come through about 45 minutes after the webinar has started. So you may have even dropped into your inboxes already. There's an important email there. Make a note of that, skillsforwales.customer@sittingills.com. So that's very useful if you've got further questions. It's good to channel them through there, and then we can centrally log all of those questions. So if you do have questions for us, please do drop it onto that email. You can always copy myself and Salim and Haradin and Ian Roberts, who's very supportive in helping develop a lot of the foundation documentation. But it's useful to send it to that email address because then it's centralized. So any further feedback or further thoughts, I really appreciate you dropping it on there. But I'm going to go back to the questions in just a moment. But if you've had all your questions answered and you've got the information you needed, it's just from myself, Sleeman and Harrod, I'd like to really thank you for your time. We do appreciate your time. We know it's very, very busy at centres at the moment. You're doing a lot of work online and trying to get learners to return work, and we're all working in difficult circumstances. So we fully empathise with the difficulties and your challenges, and it's good that you've been able to come along and listen to us with this presentation. So we do hope you've found the hour valuable. If you do have to leave now, just thanks for your attendance, and hope you're safe and well wherever you are, and enjoy the rest of your day and your evening. But we will remain on checking to see if there's any further questions for the next few minutes at least, and we'll continue answering them. And if not, we'll close in 5 or 10 minutes. So I'll go back to the questions tab. But again, thanks very much. If the exam is at the latter part of the course, does that mean the practical project is end loaded as the exam must be passed? I suppose we wouldn't call it end loaded as such. They are an exam that incorporates 6 units, so it will come at the latter stage of the course quite naturally. And so will the practical project. So there will still be learning and practice assessments and formative assessments and training ongoing as part of the natural delivery, but you're working towards a learner completing the project during those 60 hours, I think it is total, at the latter stages of the qualification, because only then have you been able to taught those skills to enable them to complete projects. So it will naturally break down into those sort of 3 tasks as you work through it, where you're planning. So that'll be a desk-based activity. So I think centres will naturally get to learn when the most appropriate times to deliver that section is. But yeah, they naturally come, I think, at the end of the course. It's the design of the new courses. Regarding the exam, how many times can learners retake it? There's no limit on the amount of times a learner can take an exam other than your own quality assurance practices. So if a learner is not successful, there'll be a period of retraining, relearning, a time to reflect on what they did well before the centre will re-enter them. So I think what would happen with a learner who's particularly struggling or particularly far behind, they may naturally run out of time during that academic year, but there's no limit on the times you can take it. Oh, someone's saying, sorry to bombard you with questions. That's perfectly fine. That's what we're here for. I hope I'm answering them as I'm trying to answer them as well as I can. It's new to all of us. You know, it's a new qualification for us to launch yourselves. It's a new qualification for you to deliver. So that I know there's a lot for everyone to take on board and absorb, and that's why we're trying to do these webinars periodically. So hopefully through a series of them, we're building up our own skills and knowledge on the best ways to approach these. And as with any change, my advice is always the same really on the change is I think naturally we tend to think, well, we know how we deliver this, we're comfortable with this, how can we make the new one look like the one we're doing now that we're comfortable with? And often you've got to break through that. You've got to break into the new and think, okay, it's different. We're going to have to approach it differently. And it takes a different approach and a different thought process almost. So that's why I say take a lot of these documents and sit with your teams, have a chat about it. You need to reflect on it as well. It doesn't always come to you at first how best to deliver it and how it will fit in with how you're currently running it. I think it's often difficult in the transition time when you've got some people on the current and some people on the new, and you're trying to deliver both. That's never an easy sort of process to work through that change management. So we do understand that, and that's what we're here for. You know, there'll be things we don't get right, and between us we'll figure it out. Let's have a look at it collaboratively. Let's work together, and we know the direction we're heading in. Let's just hope that we can all make a success of it. I'm sure that we will. Yeah, someone asking for details of the Wales Electrical Forum. If you could email me after this, please, I'll share your details, definitely. So david.pye@sittinghills.com. Or equally, you can send it to Skills, the email address on the slide there, skillsforwales.customer@sittinghills.com, and copy me in. Either really, but yeah, I'll definitely pick that up afterwards. I'm just laughing at one of the questions that's come up about rugby league. If you get me talking about rugby league, we'll definitely take the full hour and a half. It'd be you wouldn't shut me up if I started talking rugby.
Yeah. You're biased towards that anyway, David. I mean, I'll happily read out the question. Do you think Warrington will win the league? Maybe you can answer that.
Well, they've been trying for 60 years since they last won it, so maybe they've got a chance next time. But I've got a feeling that history will repeat itself, and they'll be looking to the next year and the next year and the next year. Is that a diplomatic way of putting it?
I was going to say that was very politically correct, actually.
So, well, we're about 7 minutes past 4. So we're happy to stay as long as you need us. There's still plenty on the call, but I understand if you need to go. Any other final thoughts or questions, please put them down now. Type them in, and we'll try and get to those. And if we don't get any fresh questions, we'll close in a couple of minutes. Well, there's no fresh questions, so I'll go and see who Warrington have signed this year to see if they've got a chance of winning the league. But yeah, once again, thanks very much for your attendance from myself, Salim, and Anne Harrod. Stay safe, and hope to see you all soon. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Thank you very much, all. Bye-bye.